Remembrancers and Iterators. The Remembrancers were a class of itinerant artists and chroniclers, those that accompanied the forces of the Great Crusade under license and edict. Following the expeditionary fleets, they recorded what they saw in words, pics, paintings, sculpture, music, and any number of other modes of expression in order to immortalize the actions and forces of the Great Crusade. The order died with the onset of the Horus Heresy, and its works were deemed too dangerous to endure and have since been destroyed, although much is said to remain under seal of utmost secrecy. The Iterator order also accompanied the Great Crusade. The task of the Iterators is to promulgate the message of the imperial truth on every compliant world ascending to the Imperium, as well as to reinforce the secularity and rationality of its tenets on the imperial worlds and within the Great Crusade's fleets. They were recruited from the most erudite, sharp-witted, and silver-tongued teachers of Terra. Men and women trained to have such a firm belief in the imperial truth and keep keen grasp of rhetoric, debate, and diplomacy that when making their orations, they could smother any arguments of contrary of their specific dogma. Dozens of peaceful compliances were achieved thanks in no small part to the work of the Iterators. Though cynics might suggest that it was the threat of the bolters of the Legiones Astartes standing at the Iterators' sides which cowed worlds into compliance, rather than philosophy, eloquence, and logic. Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Otaku, the well-rounded nerd. Let's talk about something different today. So the image being held up on my thumbnail is this one. And I'm reading from the Edge of Darkness rulebook. Please don't come for me, Black Library and Games Workshop. I love you. I'm just letting the people know what's going on. But it's this image. This, I believe, is actually an Iterator. This is not a Remembrancer listed here, but they are very important to the history of the Imperium. Much of what we know of the Horus Heresy is because of what the Remembrancers put down into word, into songs, into music, into pics and poetry and the rest of it. Although a lot of it was destroyed because the Remembrancers, being fully human, they were more susceptible to the influences of chaos than the legionaries were, and they just simply didn't have the strength to withstand. The most iconic telling that I've gotten to would be out of the books that follow Fulgrim's progress in the Horus Heresy. Fulgrim was that Primarch who was just very, I'm about me and nobody else, but he was very much about the arts and celebrating those things that make humans human. And he's quoted as saying, he says it to his favorite brother, Pharismanos, he says it to the Gorgon, that, what are we fighting for if not the art, the things that human produce, the things that make us human? And I think that Fulgrim took to the Remembrancers in a way the other legions didn't, because a lot of legions just saw them as humans in the way. Like, why are we taking pictures? Why are we painting? Why are we making art and music? Like, just war. Just let us go war. But what are we protecting if not that which makes us human? I mean, that's what all of this bovine scatology behind me is. It's that which makes me human. It's that makes us who we are. And I wish that that message from Fulgrim had become something that he stood for more. But the chaos god that he fell to is one that feeds into pleasure, but it perverts pleasure. So it takes all of those things that would be considered good and beautiful and turns them into something twisted. And then they became a legion, the Emperor's Children, who were just chasing experience, because every experience had to be greater, because the last one was now the new benchmark. No matter how beautiful something was, it had to be more beautiful. No matter how exuberant something was, it had to be more exuberant. No matter how painful something was, the next experience had to be more painful so that they could keep having sensation. I would almost call what happened in the the Emperor's Children, a small trigger warning. I would almost call it a metaphor for addiction, honestly, because that's what they're chasing. Those that fell to Slanesh were chasing something that the goalpost kept moving. Because that's what happens when people fall into addiction. They are always chasing that first moment, but they're never going to have that again. That went way deeper than I thought it was going to. But what happened with the Remembrancers in the Emperor's Children, I've done a few readings from Fulgrim and from Angel Exterminatus talking about what happened to some of them, but the biggest example, I think, would be what happened in the Meraviglia. So one of the composers, Serena De Angelis, she was in the middle of writing basically a symphony in honor of Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children and the Emperor and all his good works. But when chaos infected the ship, she was one of those who was greatly affected. And she basically produced just debauchery in music. And what she came up with, it put so much passion, hateful passion, into those that were listening in the symphony hall, that it just turned into a bloodbath in there. I read that for Halloween last year. I might repost it this year. I might reread it. I don't know. Maybe I can read it better. But it is just a horrific scene. And then they ended up closing the music hall because of that. They're like, a thing happened in there. We're not going to talk about the Meraviglia ever again. That was the name of her symphony, the Meraviglia. So yeah, it was a whole thing. They closed that room up. Nobody goes in there. It was that bad that her music produced murder, basically, is what happened. But that was the infection of chaos. It took what was beautiful and perverted it. And then there is Ostian Delfor, who was, I believe, a sculptor, the greatest sculptor on Terra, who was trying to make an image of Fulgrim himself, but he had been cloistered in his chambers, trying to stare at this marble and bring forth the image. And in his final moments of working, Fulgrim actually enters his chambers, and he doesn't even know he's there. And Fulgrim realizes that this Remembrancer is not pro-chaos, that he's still loyal to the Emperor, and he slaughters him on his own artwork. And then Fulgrim declares it a masterpiece once it's covered in Ostian's blood. Yeah, the Remembrancers got done dirty because they were there to categorize, catalog, remember all of the great deeds, which we've had that throughout our own history, through real history. We have people who remember. We have so many books. This is why we have novels. This is why we have hieroglyphics. This is why we have pyramids everywhere, statues, museums and museums of paintings, artifacts of masks and weapons and jewelry and clothing, purposely remembering the things that have happened and having respect for it. But the Imperium, with everything that happened, chaos-wise, decided to bury most of what the Remembrancers did. So they did all of that work, and they sacrificed so much, only for it to be put away. Because if chaos was imbued into any of what they created, they could not have that getting out into the Imperium of Man. And that brings us to the Iterators. The Iterators are not interpreters of beauty. The Iterators are there to iterate the will of the Emperor. I would honestly, in modern terms, liken it to something along the systems of the Episcopal Church, the Church of England, or even the Catholic Church, because the way that they train up their priests and their nuns and anyone who has the ability to orate their services, no matter what Catholic church you go to on any given day, they all preach in the same thing, because it is decided elsewhere, printed up and sent out to all the churches, this is what you're preaching. And then they train up their people to speak in the way that they want them to in the monasteries and the nunneries. That's what monasteries were always for, is to train people up in religion. And historically, we think of Catholicism, that, you know, the interpretations need to be within line of the religion. The Iterators, that's what they were doing for the Emperor. The big difference is the Emperor claims there's no religion in the future. There are no gods. Although he's out there being God, there are no gods. Even though he's going to let Mars worship the machine god, because that's where the bullets come from. You just let the bullet farm be. The bullet farm can do whatever it wants, because we need the bullet farm. So, you know, that's where all the weapons come from. Emperor's like, you know what, they want to have a god? I don't care. Just make me a ship. So there's an exception to every single rule. And that would be it in the Imperium of Man in the early days. But what's funny is with the Iterators, their job was to bring that imperial truth to everyone. Every world that they came to, Iterators would be there basically to preach to the people and evangelize them into the way of thinking of the Imperium of Man, the way the Emperor wanted them to think, to whatever traditions they had, religions they had, to put those aside and now come into the imperial truth. Remind you of anything? I'm not going to say it, but you know. But that's what they were doing. And there were worlds that were brought into compliance not by sword, but by word. And honestly, I would wager that a world that is brought into compliance by words is more loyal and potentially more malleable than those brought by guns, because you can always fight back. But once you get people's minds and you get people's spirits, you got them. There is something uniquely powerful about all that we term religion and philosophy. When it gets into us, it changes our thinking, it changes who we are, it changes our perspectives. That's how cults happen. Is I could not find that which I could connect to in convenient world. This one person said a thing that spoke to me. Next thing you know, they mind controlled and done disappeared, and nobody knows where they are. It's interesting that the emperor was so firm that there should be no religion, because we know what happens in 40k. The Lectitio Divinitatis that Lorgar wrote, he basically penned the Bible of the Imperium in the 40k, but he was condemned for his worship of the Emperor in the 30k universe. I stand on this business. It is the Emperor's direct fault that Lorgar fell, and honestly, the rest of the legions. He should have told them what chaos was. He should have told them what they were messing with. You can't tell your kids everything, but when they get old enough, and you go, especially going to send them out to fight your battles, you need to have conversations with them. The Emperor should have talked. He should have talked to his sons and said, look, here's the deal. He created that problem, but it is so ironic that Lorgar saw Monarchia, the perfect city, annihilated for his worship of the Emperor, for his speaking to the ruinous powers, when the Emperor himself was out speaking to the ruinous powers. Check that. And then it becomes their book. It becomes the basis of the Inquisitors. The Iterators actually get absorbed at some point into the Inquisition, because the Inquisition are those that protect the Imperium from the Xenos, from the alien, from the heretic, and then from the incels that are being created. The Iterators were trained to be amazing speakers. I've been told that I'm a good speaker. When I practice, I'm actually decent. People who can speak well have more control than anyone. There's something about folks who say the right words at the right time, in the right intonation, the right tone, to the right people, and it sucks them in. That's what makes me a good trainer. I have the ability to connect with people, but not on a superficial level. I actually care. Here's a secret to life. You don't have to pretend to care if you actually do. But people can feel that I actually care about what happens to them, what happens in their environment, and that they're successful. So they respond well to my classes. Politicians, religious figures, there are people who will give themselves up for a cause and basically lose their own identity because they feel like this person, this organization, this whatever was said is going to bring to me that which will make my life better. And the Emperor knows that. The Emperor, remember, he's the longest lived human. He knows more about humans than humans ever will. And what he has seen is that words can be used to control. Nothing controls people like words. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Nope, but they'll ruin your whole life. I'd rather get hit with sticks and stones, because the wrong words, they leave a scar that almost can't be repaired. But the right words can lift us up and put us in places that we never imagined, of feeling well and good about the world. And when they're able to bring worlds into compliance, whether it's because the Space Marines were there or not, with words instead of war, those are actually the more loyal worlds, because they got to people's minds. As a person thinks, so is he. Whatever is in here is going to show up out here. That's just how we are created. And the emperor knew that. If I can get into their heads, into their hearts, their minds, the actions I need them to do will show up naturally. You want to change a kid's behavior, you can't. But behavioral conditioning works to a point. But if it's not in their head and heart to be a certain way, a person's not going to be that way. You've got to get into a kid's head. You got to get into your spouse's head. You have to know how a person thinks. And when we understand and take time to understand how people think, we can help guide them into the things that will get them to their best. It's a really good lesson, I think, from Warhammer. That's why I love Warhammer so much, is because it's a good way to look at reality without having to look at reality. It's that little bit of separation because of the veil that's created with the suspension of disbelief, where we can dive into deep topics without it weighing us down to the point that we can't handle it. I think for Halloween, I might read more of what happened to some of those Remembrancers in Fulgrim, because Halloween is about 2 months away at the time of me recording this. So yeah, I'm going to start thinking about that, because come on, Fulgrim and Fabia's got Halloween on lock in the Warhammer universe. Well, I mean, there's a Curse, there's a Night Haunter. Not my favorite Primarch. We all have our favorites. He's not on my list. But hey, she's got lots of things to do today. But I wanted to, before I hit another Primarch, there's so much more lore in this book. And when I opened it, I saw the Remembrancers page. I was like, oh, that. Let's talk about them today. Yeah, follow him. Look at him. Look at that face. It's a face only a mother could love. Yeah, he shows up and starts preaching the good news to you. You gonna follow him? Not I. Yeah, let it be a lesson to all of us. Remember that art is a direct production of the environment in which it's created. You can't judge it by a modern standard if it was created 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 10 minutes ago, because the world's ever changing, and so the art will change with it to reflect the world it's in. And be careful who you listen to. They might sound like they're bringing you a message of hope, but it may be a message of control that will take over your life. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.